Before I kick things off, I'll just introduce briefly who I am and then who we are. So my name is Alexander Garganta. I also go by a nickname of Sasha. I help with the product direction here at PlusPlus. Before then, I was at Twitter, where I helped manage the Twitter University team, including a few others. That sort of got me exposed to this amazing world of corporate and professional learning and development. PlusPlus is a knowledge sharing hub. We help technical organizations mostly help manage their large learning and development efforts, specifically around events, so workshops and classes, tracks to help model their onboarding and other kinds of arcs of learning, and then experts or coaching and mentorship. So with that, I will introduce our two speakers, or in fact, I will ask them to introduce themselves, John and Trevor, who are calling in from Netflix. What's really exciting about this conversation, why I'm really excited to have them here, is they're going to talk about how they add human touch into what otherwise would be somewhat, just a self-paced experience. How they really truly model their blended learning approach, which is a challenge that a lot of us have been seeing, especially this year because of everything that's been going on. So with that, I will stop presenting. I will invite them to introduce themselves and then also paint a little bit of the sort of picture for us about the problem they set out to solve. So both who they are, where they come from, what they do at Netflix, how were they solving challenges in their space, and then what was the actual true challenge that they sought to overcome. So with that, I will ask you to kick things off for us.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Hi there, everybody. Oh, am I on mute? No. There you go. You can hear me. Hi, everybody. I'm Trevor.
I'm John. Trevor's going to be presenting some things that we're going to talk about here to set up a little bit of that context that Sasha had mentioned. When we describe our roles at Netflix, they're not exactly self-explanatory, so it kind of requires a little bit extra explanation and a little bit of more insight into how Netflix works, and particularly how the Netflix studio works. So with that, I'll start with my introduction. So hi, everyone. I'm John Zinni. Before I came to Netflix, I actually was a producer, a television producer for the Tennis Channel, actually. I produced everything from feature-length documentaries to short-form instructional content to a travel show that took me all around the world as we chased the sun, as tennis tends to do. And I learned a lot, worked in all different phases of production, but I was always short-staffed. So I typically looked to technology to help scale what I was doing and my colleagues, because we didn't really have the option for any additional resources or personnel. So I was always looking at technology, how to make my life easier and everyone I work with life's easier as well.
And hi there, everybody. I'm Trevor. Before coming to Netflix, I worked in the film industry, primarily in the production office of some larger budget films, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Ant-Man, and most recently, Big Little Lies for HBO. When I was working in production, my department was responsible for essentially facilitating everyone who were the boots on the ground actually making the content. And so a lot of that, what went into that was organizing, planning, finding solutions and software so that we can keep track of everything. And we came to Netflix so that we could bring some of our film industry insight into the world of more of an educational world. So Netflix, that's where we are. That's a lot of what y'all have seen today. John and I are from Netflix, but we really specifically work in a part of Netflix that we call the studio. Yep. And when you think about Netflix studios, you may think about this, which is, there we go. You probably think about this. Is it going to do it? Great. So fun. This worked like 4 seconds ago. Oh, nope. Great. There we go. Wonderful. As you can imagine, that would have landed had the timing played out. But it didn't, but we roll with it. So when you think about Netflix, you probably think about the item, you think about the moment when you sit down on your couch to watch a piece of content. But John and I specifically work in the studio. So to give y'all an idea of what we mean when we say the studio, we have a very quick, 60, 70 seconds that explains what Netflix Studios is, what they do, why they exist.
What is Netflix Studios? It's our global offices managing content that is being created all over the world. Studio management starts with content acquisition. They find and evaluate submissions to put on the service, some of which we license and some of which we produce. Content acquisition shares projects with business affairs and legal in order to finalize the deal. There are two primary ways we manage content. Partner manage, where we hire a production company to produce the content, and self-manage, where Netflix is producing the content. In pre-production, we are aligning the resources and logistics in preparation for the first day of filming. During production, we manage the health of the project and make sure the crew is staying on schedule. We oversee the transition into post-production by managing teams who will edit and deliver the final piece of content. As the content is being finalized, we start to package it for the service by adding elements that can enhance the experience for our viewers. And that's how the studio works.
Well, now that you're all experts on how a studio works, you may have noticed that that voice sounded a little familiar. That's our very own Trevor Caskey as our voiceover artist for that one. But what we just outlined there is essentially what happens for one title or one of the things that you might see on Netflix. The only problem is you may have also noticed that Netflix is producing quite a lot of content. You're seeing a lot of Netflix originals on the service, and we're talking at a scale of around 1,000 per year, happening all over the world, right? So we're talking about different languages, different cultures, different nuances and intricacies of governing bodies and ratings, et cetera. There's all this complexity that comes into creating content for the world. So what can we do to really manage that at scale? Because really right now Netflix is producing an output as a studio that's never before been seen on this global scale.
So how are we attempting to do that? By investing in an interconnected ecosystem of software built to help us manage our shows at scale. When we say software, what do we mean? We mean a tool like Prodigal. Prodigal is a production-facing tool meant for our shows to use to manage all of their crew working on their show and manage how they are communicating with that crew.
Another example is Content Hub, which is our singular, secure, and streamlined place for our productions to upload digital assets for near-term use and long-term archival. So these are all the sort of building blocks that go into the final thing that you press play on. Those things have to be delivered from the vendors that we work with so that we can have them for long-term archival, because maybe someday we want to do a remastered version of Stranger Things season 3 in 6K.
We also have a tool like Media Center, which all of our press and publicity partners around the world use to discover information about our originals, as well as help them create marketing assets they can then use to write articles and things like that. And you may think these are 3 of many. This is by no means the entire ecosystem of what our team trains on, but a small sampling of it.
Yeah, and one of the big reasons why these 3 exist and the rest of the ecosystem exists is because solutions that would work for older studios they don't work at our scale. They just tend to break and they can't really capture the complexity of what we're doing. So that's really why we've invested in this ecosystem, but the ecosystem is a little hard to grasp. It's a little hard to wrangle. So our users, if you are stakeholders, both internal to Netflix and external to Netflix, like the vendors and facilities that we hire, they can use a little help in that. And that's where our team comes in.
Speaking of our team, we are the studio product rollout team. Our team is responsible for training and rolling out new products across our company and all of our external partners that use these tools when managing titles they're working on.
So we weren't always this team necessarily, and that had this large of a scope and purview. So we're going to give you a little history lesson that will help inform the problem that we're talking about today. the specific problem, I should say. So back in January 2020, which is not that long ago, but my God, it seems like a lifetime ago, considering the events of this past year. This was our scope of work. It was a subset of the ecosystem, pretty small, managed by a smaller, a small team, myself, Trevor, and a few others. And the way that we would tackle training on these applications was pretty simple. We held regularly scheduled recurring 101 sessions on an application by application basis or product by product basis. So these would be dedicated 1 hour sessions that we would host on PlusPlus here. And we would really dive pretty deep for a 101 into why these applications exist, how to best use them, depending on what area of the business you're coming from.
But as you may be getting a sense of, in February of 2020, our world was turned a little bit upside down because our team's scope went from this to this. Now, instead of managing a handful or a collection of tools, we were responsible for figuring out our entire product ecosystem and figuring out how can we actually train, deliver quality learning resources for everything that was now under our purview.
Yeah.
So we started shifting our model a little bit. We were no longer leaning solely on in-person 101 sessions and started to lean more into a blended learning approach. I'm sure everybody here hears that term fairly often. The nods are confirming my suspicion. And so we started creating videos. We started creating decks. We started creating help center articles. We created e-learning courses. We created WalkMe in-app tutorials. And as we started doing this, we were finding that people were using these resources and things like that, but it led to a new problem we had never had before as a team. We lost the human element that was our team. It disappeared.
And this is probably one of the most important aspects of our team that we didn't mention when we talked about the 101. So essentially, when people take those 101 courses, it's usually in their first couple of weeks at Netflix, which is a very critical period. It's hard to start working at any company. It's especially hard to start working at Netflix in the studio. Even if you have 10, 15 years of studio experience, Netflix is a different animal entirely. Not the least of reasons being not the least of which that this ecosystem exists and you have to kind of learn about it for your everyday job. It will help you in the long run, but it certainly kind of makes your onboarding a little bit more challenging because these are things that don't really exist out in the world until you come to Netflix, right? So there's no way you can really learn about them besides coming to a lunch and learn and getting a little sneak peek before actually working at Netflix.
Yeah, and so that kind of introduces what we were looking to solve.
Yeah.
So thank you, John and Trevor, not only for sort of painting the picture of the problem you're looking to solve, but also giving us a little bit of an insight into how the sausage is made. I'm sure that a lot of us here are Netflix subscribers, and just getting this sort of like peek into what's under the hood is really amazing. But back to that challenge, I wanted to ask you, how did you realize that the human element was missing? Like how did you, was it just some intuition? Did it show up in some sort of data? How did you go from like, maybe there's something missing to like, here's, the realization of what's missing?
I would say it was a combination of the two. Like I definitely, our team is fairly intuition driven. I think just because of all the interaction that we have with stakeholders and users, we try to leverage that as much as possible. But once we noticed also that once we kind of took some of those one-on-one sessions off the schedule and they were no longer there, we were getting inundated with more and more emails. So there was definitely kind of a void, and we're trying to also bring in the sort of change management where people know to look for the assets that have been created as opposed to look for the in-person instructor-led training in person, COVID. So that it was a little bit of like, yes, we're definitely seeing an uptick in emails where people are, there might be some confusion, or there might also just be people who are expecting to see the sessions there and they don't. But the other part of it was we really felt like what was at the heart of our team was missing. Like our team was losing a little bit of its soul. As you can tell, Trevor and I are pretty gregarious people, and like this is how we really handle a lot of our sessions. And when people are going through those one-on-one sessions, or when they did back earlier in the year, it was a critical period for them, and they were inundated with information starting at Netflix and terrified. I was in the same shoes, 2+ years ago. So having a team like ours who was going to bring you into this world, this ecosystem, explain what it is, explain how you're going to interact with it, and really just be kind of a warm blanket for you, because it really is challenging to start at Netflix. So we were missing that warm blanket sort of a team to rely on aspect, because we had removed the human element out of it. We've just created assets that lived asynchronously that people could interact with. But when do you actually get FaceTime with myself or Trevor or any of our colleagues? So that was the problem, really.
Awesome. And did you have to validate this sort of problem with anyone, or were you sort of sure enough to immediately kind of jump into exploring how to solve for it?
I think, it was a problem that was definitely compounded by COVID in the reality of it. We were losing the regularly scheduled interactions you would just see in someone with a building when you're walking by in the hallway. And so we could definitely feel it, because people who would typically walk up to our desk and ask us questions or find us in the hallway, stop us when we're ending a training session, right when we leave the room and we're in the hallway, you get those honest questions that were like, hey, what you just trained on me, I don't think I'm going to use, but here's my problem. And I need a solution to this problem. And so we were missing that entirely. And it was 100% evident that it wasn't there.
Got it. Cool. So how did you, okay, so now you identified the problem. What was your path towards like exploring how to bring this back? Like, was there like a brainstorming session? Did you have a bunch of potential approaches that you identified? Or, how did that path to like, here's how we want to solve this emerge for you?
It's funny, we had definitely identified the problem. We had done a little bit of sort of, consideration in terms of how do we solve this, especially considering our lack of resources, and like the directive really is to kind of scale our efforts. In-person FaceTime, so to speak, is not really the most scalable thing. So we kind of just had our eyes open and eyes and ears open, and then all of a sudden we were in a meeting with PlusPlus, and you folks actually showed us a relatively new feature that we had not yet turned down for our Netflix instance. And then that really started to percolate some ideas for us. I'm like, oh, wait a second, maybe we could leverage this to solve our problem.
And it was interesting to add a little bit there, but the feature was very new. And so what it was offering out the gate was the ability to book a one-on-one. That's what it was really offering out the gate. And we were kind of leaning into the limitation to explore, what does a world look like where we are having potentially more one-on-ones than we've ever had before, but can we use that time smarter than we ever have before?
And just a little context, like one-on-ones are pretty common at Netflix, but it can also be a bear to schedule because people's calendars are bananas. So when you're trying to find some time, your calendar very well might be bananas. I know mine tends to be, in Trevor's as well. So trying to find that sweet spot where you can both have available time can be an arduous task in and of itself.
Got it. So before I invite you to actually showcase that solution, I am curious, like, I'll ask this one more time, is like, you talked about scale, like you're being asked to scale. And what I'm hearing you talk about is like one-on-ones, which kind of sounds the opposite of scale. So like, how did that thought even get into your head? Like, how did you think like that must be the thing that for us to try?
I have to say, the way that I think about it is that this is truly blended learning. I don't think everybody is best suited for learning via an asset. I think some people, just by the way that they learn and their own preferences, they need that FaceTime. They need to be able to ask questions in real time. So really, it's just an extension of blended learning. It's just the element that we were missing because we were trying to run with creating assets before really thinking about what we were doing. So if anything, I think it makes for a more comprehensive blending learning approach.
Yeah, okay. And just to quickly add, the flip side of it is There were people who were attending our 101s who were super technology savvy, who could take a user guide, read it in 10 minutes and get everything they needed out of it. And so by adding this as another kind of pillar of what we were offering, we were maximizing not only our own time, but everyone who was attending our sessions.
Got it. So when you say this, can you sort of, is there something you can show us? Can you sort of like tell us how this fits into your program? Can you just, let us experience what this is for, in the life of someone at Netflix trying to engage with your team?
To answer the question I just saw pop up in the chat, we were saying 101s originally, and we pivoted to one-on-ones.
Yeah.
So we have 2 letters difference, but yeah, a very different approach to how we're doing it. But yeah, let's kind of highlight what we're talking about here. So what our team decided to do was to create a program that we called Ask Us Anything. And what we were able to do was leverage PlusPlus as a way to essentially slot time slots of our availability, where we would have 2-3 hours a day that are just open to be booked by a first come, first served basis. And if someone had a question, they could come there, book something, no emails required, nothing of the sort. It was literally just fits into whenever they needed it at their convenience.
And then we tried to create some cohesiveness because we were creating so many assets. We tried to bookend all the assets that we created with the link to these Ask Us Anything sessions. So if you have any questions going into interacting with an asset, any questions after interacting with an asset, or any follow-ups, you can get that FaceTime with one of us and dig a little deeper.
So and this is still a one-on-one, right? Like we're not talking about an office hours, like where anyone can show up and bunch of folks are being served at once. Is that right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. And it's in concept very similar to an office hour. It's us setting time aside in order to be available for someone when they need it. Except the difference is that it optimizes our time. So for example, if no one books the one-on-one, we get that time back to work on other things. Whereas with a typical office hours, you might just be sitting, waiting for someone to hop in at any moment. And so it was really helpful for us to just kind of fit it into what we were doing.
Yep, and it was also a benefit on the other end of things, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But here's a look at sort of the UI for our program, Ask Us Anything. And you can see there's some available time for our different specialists. So we can look at all of our individual calendars, set time there, and then once somebody who's looking to to book and Ask Us Anything, they can come here and book a session. And once they click the book session button on any of these time slots, it's going to open up this modal where you can see all the information that you're about to create a Google Calendar event that's going to conjoin both these people together. But what's really cool is additionally, you have this this field here where you can say what subject you'd like to cover. So essentially, what is the agenda for this one-on-one? And then what that allows us to do is that we can say, oh, I have 4 AUAs, I have 4 Ask Us Anythings today, and they're all booked. They're all probably different subjects. So I'm going to kind of want to prepare for all of these to whatever extent that I need to before actually jumping into those individual meetings.
Yeah. And by doing it like that as well, on occasion we would get someone who emailed us and it was very clear what the solution to their problem was. So as soon as something like that came in via this feed, we could just point them to the resource they were looking for and give them that time back as well.
Yeah.
So go ahead, John.
I was just going to say we definitely benefited because it was, I think Trevor indicated this already, it was a little bit of a win-win. Like the time was available for people to book. So that was great. So they had that recourse. But if the time didn't get booked, we also got that time back to do our own work if need be. It wasn't really like it was interfering with us in any way. So from that standpoint, it was a win-win. The other thing that we really found out was that in our 101 sessions, like our hour-long dedicated sessions to one app, we're really talking about one application, one product for the full hour, right? These are much less prescriptive. So typically most employees at Netflix, they're going to be using multiple products, multiple applications to do their job. So what was great is in these shorter segments, in these half hours, we could cover multiple applications in that time that was just specific and just tailored to that individual person. So if they don't need to know the full extent of an application, we just show them the part that's relevant to them, move on to the next, or whatever else they might have questions about. So it was a really impactful time for them, as opposed to maybe they show up to a one-on-one session and it's not super relevant to them, but they're still there for the full hour and really not really gaining as much as they do in half the time with us here.
So it sounds to me like a one-on-one, this sort of Ask Me Anything. It's all as if they're creating a course for themselves and they're setting the sort of the syllabus in advance, and you're sort of meeting their needs, right? Like it's in the inverse of what normally would take place.
It's the bespoke experience.
And
Right.
it's also been an opportunity where someone says, hey, I was told I need to learn this tool to solve this problem. And just by reading that, we can sometimes, dissect to say, oh, they're definitely using the wrong tool to solve that problem. When they come to this half hour, I'm going to point them to the right resource that they are looking for to truly help them as much as possible.
Yeah.
Got it. So one other question I have, and then I'll ask a question from the audience, is why this sort of modality? Why not, Slack? Why not email? Why not sort of like, how did you arrive that this is sort of the right model for you to have these kinds of conversations?
I think that kind of harkens back to us realizing that it's not a true blended learning experience unless we have this element of it, right? Like, I think it helps make this a more comprehensive approach, because some people really require that level of interaction when they learn, the level of in the moment questions that they want to ask to really like have things hit home for them. Mm-hmm. So I think Slack is always available, and like people are welcome to do that. We have a Slack channel where people can ask us questions, and we pretty quick on the SLAs on that front. But I think this is different than that. I think this is, you want to cover a lot of ground, you can do that here in and Ask Us Anything. You want to we want to ask a question that maybe you wouldn't want to ask anywhere else. There's a little bit of like privacy there as well, where our team again can come in as sort of a warm blanket. I think even calling them Ask Us Anythings and not calling them like product rollout learning or whatever makes it even less prescriptive. So if you come to Netflix and you're totally just disoriented and you just want someone to help you find your bearings, like we're there for that too, whether it pertains to our products or not. We're really just here to help anybody internal to Netflix get off on the right foot, or get up to speed on a new feature they're not familiar with, even if they're a long-standing employee.
And this isn't in a silo from Slack or email. So if someone emails us and says, hey, I need help with this thing, we can take a link to this page, send it to them, and say, choose whatever time works best for you. Yeah. So we're leveraging this model to meet them when they still have those requests.
We're definitely moving towards like an all roads lead to AUAs type of model, where it's linked on our assets. It's linked to anytime someone's needing that extra level of care from us.
One question for you, and I know there's a bunch of questions for the audience, and please keep on having them, posting them. But how much do you think it's important to have this idea of like you pre sort of proposing times for you to meet with folks, like pre-scheduling them, as opposed to having them ping you and schedule time with you kind of as they see fit? Like you've kind of like it's almost like a doctor's office, like giving people like schedules in advance. Why is that important?
I would say,
go ahead.
Let's say it in tandem. I would say it just removes the awkwardness. There's like a zero contact. It's kind of like when I want to get a haircut, I can either call the place that I'm going to get the haircut, or I can download the app and see if I can book an appointment and just go do it. It's the same level of, you have that anonymity, and it's just easy at your fingers when you want to do it.
There is the aspect of like the removing a little bit of the cognitive load of it. It's just like, okay, these are the times, I click it, I put my thing in, now it's on the schedule, perfect. I didn't have to like cross-reference anybody's calendars or anything like that. It really gets straight to the point and loops two people in together very, very quickly.
Awesome. I did say that we're going to wait on some of the questions from the audience for later, but there are two there that are sort of, I think, very interesting. One is about international folks? Like, are you able to serve folks from these international markets, and how does that work? And two is around the scale. Like, what is your total audience, and what is the rate of these, one-on-ones or ask me anything that you have? Like, how does this look?
Yeah, so we have the majority of our team is based in Los Angeles. We have two teammates in EMEA, and we have one teammate looking to get another teammate in APAC right now. And so they leverage this program for their regions as well to answer those additional questions. You're not seeing it in the photo right here, but they have time slots available to book with them. Something I will call out is right now, this program is for internal Netflix employees. So the folks who are working on our shows and producing the content, who more so fall into like the freelancer category, they're not booking through this. It's primarily Netflix employees.
Got it. So let's jump ahead a bit and look at the results of this. Like how we talked about the problem. You said you were missing the human element. What are you now noticing as a result of this program?
I think, anecdotally speaking, I think every time we have an AUA, we can feel the impact for that person. So just from that standpoint, everything about it makes it feel like we're doing the right thing here. It's hard to, kind of follow that person's journey to see like what the actual impacts are. Like, are they using the product with the best way possible, or what is the actual comprehension of what just happened? But in the moment, it certainly feels like this is the right thing. This is the necessary thing to fully round out our offerings, essentially.
And to add to the anecdotal side of things, it is quite often something where someone will be in the last 5 minutes of our Ask Us Anything and say to us, this is the best meeting I have had in 6 months, a year, because they have been living in like this fog that is the ecosystem we showed earlier with all the lines and all the icons connected to each other. And they can finally ask those questions. How does this connect to this?
Right.
Okay, if that's there, how does this work here? And just truly have someone who can answer all of those questions for them.
We are one of the few teams with the rare position that has an understanding of the entirety of the ecosystem. There's a lot of, and not as a negative necessarily, but there's a lot more siloed work happening in those individual areas, right? So you have dedicated people on a problem space in a certain business area, but they might not know the full extent of the ecosystem that are in business areas that are not related to what they do whatsoever. So we're one of the rare teams that really sees it all. And that's part of the reason why we called the sessions Ask Us Anything, because if anybody has any questions about connections or the full extent of the ecosystem, we have that sort of top-down view to help make those connections.
So thank you. And I have two follow-up questions to that. One is like, have you noticed any change in the rate of emails that you were getting from people around the confusion that might have existed before? And two is how has this affected your other learning initiatives? I think Karen asked, how does this tie into your other learning tracks, and how did the two things connect?
So it heavily ties into all of our other learning tracks because as John mentioned earlier, we advertise and promote these Ask Us Anything sessions in every one of our blended learning assets. We end all of them with, do you still have questions? Book and Ask Us Anything. And we start a lot of them by saying, hey, before you go too far, just know if you have questions while you're working through this, book and Ask Us Anything. And so it just serves as another piece of that equation for the folks who need it the most.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know there was a part one to that question we didn't answer.
Part one was about the emails. Like, are you noticing fewer confused people walking through the virtual hallways of Netflix now?
Yes, for sure. And I would say too that this program as it stands today is still fairly early days. So I think as people get more used to us offering this blended learning approach and interacting with assets, they'll see the Ask Us Anything sort of bookends, and we'll get more and more traffic going that way. We send out like a newsletter every couple of weeks, and we usually promote that this program exists. And without fail, there's an uptick in bookings every time we send out the email. So we just think it's a matter of time as we get more awareness, we'll get more adoption.
And to give an idea of how much we're doing when we say we're doing this at scale, between about 6 of us, we are doing 40 to 50 of these time slots made available every week.
Yeah.
So it's roughly, I don't know, eight per week that we are allotting. And as far as booking goes, it's roughly 30 to 40% per week. And that's very good for what we're going for. If we had 100% being booked of this, we would think there is a much greater problem that needs addressing than if we are getting 30 to 40%, because we're setting more time than we think people actually need for that reason.
Right, just trying to be more amenable to people's schedules. We're putting more time up there than we think is probably going to be booked. So the booking rate is not necessarily a leading indicator of our success. It's more the efficacy in the moment, I think, to some extent. And like Trevor said, if we were like, if we were even over 50, 60%, I'd probably start to get worried. I would think, let's revisit our assets. They're not doing the job, or there's some other like large point of confusion that is creating this influx of bookings.
And as far as working at a company where your calendar is always full, having these time slots as regularly scheduled things where you may get a few breaks over the course of your day is a fantastic benefit for us as well.
Yeah. John, I love what you said about sort of this almost serves as a feedback loop to you and your team around the efficacy of your other self-paced learning programs. So it's not just about, helping the folks who are coming in, it's also giving you where you can improve your other learning efforts.
Yeah, I mean, so this definitely doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Like it's all part of the blended learning approach, all part of that equation. Some of the Ask Us Anything things really have like nothing to do with what we predominantly work on, and that's fine too, because we're always just here to help. We've all worked at Netflix for a long time, so if there's general sort of just tech questions or questions that people are trying to get oriented, we're happy to do that too. But most of the time, they are scoped within sort of products in the ecosystem, and we're happy to help there.
That's awesome.
I was just going to anecdotally say, like, we said it's a very safe space for them, to the point where sometimes people come to us and it's like, my team keeps sending me this and I have no idea how this thing works. So please, please, please teach me before I leave this. And it's just really like they leave it with that enthusiasm that's like, oh, this is much easier than I thought it was. I'm glad somebody explained it to me.
That's an interesting point. A lot of us in classes sometimes don't want to, hold back a question we have because we may want to ask a stupid question. But in this setting, it seems there's more than psychological safety to sort of come with all sorts of questions. That's awesome. So let's, I do want to sort of end with a section on the future and kind of where do you see this program going, so that we can get to the questions from the audience. I know some of them we've already touched on, but there's plenty more. So can you tell us a bit about like where, like, I know that this is somewhat early, as you said. What are some of the potentially still missing pieces? How do you see this morphing in the future? What do you see ahead?
So I can say here that what we've determined with this program combined with our blended learning assets is we are doing a very good middle and end of the funnel. So we're really good when someone identifies, hey, I need to learn this thing, and delivering on how they learn about that. But what we're finding is we still need to kind of perfect, how does someone even learn that they need to learn about something? And so that's what our team is exploring right now and hoping to launch the beginning of 2020 is more of, instead of the 101 courses that we used to do, like a general Netflix technology business overview that anyone can attend that we'll essentially use to promote all of our blended learning assets. So you can attend this, understand the business, understand how these tools fit into the business, and then we point you to all the resources you need to get up to speed.
Exactly. So imagine just an overview of the entire ecosystem that's segmented into different kind of chronological pieces. So we often call it pitch to play at Netflix. So from the time somebody pitches an idea to us to the time that it plays on the service, that is generally the timeline that we're working within. And there's all different types of teams and products that will touch that project along the way until eventually it's ready to be played on the service.
Awesome. And one last question in this space is like, would you, given there's still room for improvement, but given that you also have some experience with this effort, would you be recommending this approach to your colleagues, a bunch of us sitting here on this call, solving similar challenges? Is this something that we should try to emulate? And if so, are there any tips that we should pay attention to?
It's funny. So I've been having 1 to 2 meetings per week from other business teams around Netflix looking to leverage the same exact feature for their own purposes. So I'm more than happy to recommend it to them. I think it certainly suited their needs for the same reason that we liked it so much, is that yes, you make all this time available, but again, if it doesn't get booked, that time kind of goes back to you. Which kind of frees up some time on your calendar, but it's always there as a recourse for people should they want to learn more. So I've brought like some of our experiential design team members, colleagues onto the platform, and I think the more teams get on there, the more by osmosis that there'll be more traffic there from around the company, and probably more and more interest to come after that. But yes, I've both actively and passively recommended this particular feature to other teams around Netflix.
Trevor, anything that you wanted to add?
I was just going to add that I think we started and we were the only team operating with this for, I would say, 2 or 3 months. And now if we were to click on this 101s tab at the top of the page right here, you would see there's about 8 teams leveraging this feature today across different areas of the business, from our network engineering teams to our design teams who are hosting like design consultations. Yeah. So a lot of people are leveraging this for completely different use cases.
Interesting. Awesome. Well, with that, I first of all want to thank you so much for taking us through this sort of, overview of this program and how, from like the problems you're trying to solve all the way to the solution and sort of the results in the future. And I'll switch gears and start going through some of the questions from the audience, because I want to make sure that folks here, walk away understanding more fully what you've built. Let me start with the last one, just because it's easiest, and I'll walk backwards. Do you have a centralized training org, and how do other orgs potentially play with this?
John, you want to take this?
So I would say yes and no. So very, very recently, a lot of part of our purview exploding, when we showed you that ecosystem, where we were in January and where it went to in February, part of that move was really centralizing the training effort for that ecosystem with our team. So we've become much more centralized in that way. And at the time, we were also only training internal employees, right? So only people that are full-time employees at Netflix. But there was a whole other contingent of training teams that would train a lot of the contractors and vendors that we worked with outside of Netflix. So if you're familiar with how a studio works, it's very vendor intensive, vendor heavy, where yes, Netflix is producing the content, but we're often outsourcing a lot of the iterative work that happens on a title throughout the entire timeline of working on that particular title. So there were other teams at the company who were in charge of training those respective vendors in different areas of the business. So shortly after the purview expand happened, then also the external audience expansion happened for our team too. So now our team trains on the entire ecosystem for our internal Netflix employees and the tens of hundreds of thousands of vendors and contractors outside of Netflix that we work with all over the world. So our team has gone through a lot this year in terms of growth, but it's in the end, it's a very good thing. I think there's been quite a large vote of confidence placed in our team to be able to expand in these different ways. But generally speaking, from a internally built software standpoint, we are the centralized training team. Mm-hmm. There are definitely learning and development teams that are separate from us. There are other teams that handle different types of training, but for the purposes of the Netflix ecosystem that is being created, we are the sole proprietor of training and rollout in these efforts.
Yeah, and we are part of the product org. So we sit on the same teams as the teams who are building these products as well.
Awesome. And just for the rest of the folks in the audience, we do have a lunch and learn coming up in early to 2021 with Jasmine from the Netflix engineering educational sort of team, and they will be talking about their programs. So stay tuned for that. Another, sorry, go ahead.
Jasmine's actually a perfect example of another one of those teams that handles a lot of training and education. So she works, as her background indicates, for the Dev Ed team, which is developer education. So they do a lot of our engineering and developer onboarding and continuing education efforts. So we train more like the end users, the internal stakeholders that need to use the applications. She helps to get the actual developers who make those things, make those products up to speed.
Mm-hmm. I have another question that was, what percentage, there's actually several questions buried in this, what percentage of employees take advantage of this, maybe out of your audience that you serve? And could this be considered a culture change, meaning putting the ball in the court of the individual to seek info? And are there always people who are not so proactive? And also, I guess maybe how do cultural differences potentially apply here, where in different cultures, maybe people will be less or more likely to take advantage of an offering like this?
So what I will say as far as how are people taking advantage of this is, with any new program, we are watching the steady incline of people using it. When we first started doing it, we were not at 30% of people booking it, and we have just continued to work our way up from users. What I will say is PlusPlus as a platform itself is used by the majority of our company. It had a very, very natural kind of welcoming to our company, and the fact that anybody could create a course. And so all of our different business units across the company were like, learn about what my team does, sign up for this course. And it got a lot of good praise from there. But what we have been trying to do is communicate to folks that there are these other programs and other features that they can access from here as well. And so we've had a large group of people take advantage of this feature today, but by no means are we at 100% saturation across the company.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also not prescriptive to any specific orgs or anything. Like literally anyone can ask us anything. So it's open to the entirety of Netflix's employees.
Thank you. And another question from Janine Victor is, you share percentage of bookings. What percentage of time on average for your team does this new offering occupy? Like how intensive is this on you and your team's capacity, I guess?
I would say this, setting the time aside, if we were just to look at like what percentage of our calendars, this time slot is probably like 1/10 of what we do over the course of every week. And like we said earlier, if the time doesn't get booked, we use it for essentially working on all of our other blended learning assets.
Yeah. We basically, we've kind of structured it where I'll have a day, Trevor will have a day, our other colleagues will have a day, and we try to fill out the whole week by booking out slots on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so that they're all kind of centralized for one person on one day. So it becomes a little easier to manage. But yeah, I would agree that it's probably around 1/10 of our total work in terms of the actual bookings that happen and time that needs to be spent with folks in the one-on-ones.
And I assume that the time that you get back, you are able to take advantage of productively, because sometimes, like, if you can't plan for that time, it may be hard to fully utilize it. One last question from Iris, and then we'll sort of be closing things up, is could you share a bit about how you've synthesized common FAQs, themes that have come up in one-on-ones into these formal learning assets?
I'm trying to think if there's an example.
So what we often find is when someone attends something, we'll leave the half an hour with, and here are 3 user guides or something along those lines. And what we might find is that one of those user guides, we have someone reaching back out to us afterwards to say, or book another session and say, okay, I have new questions now about this. And so really we use these to polish and perfect our assets. If someone comes in with a question that we are not offering in our assets, it's immediate feedback to us that we need to be addressing that better. If someone comes in And it is addressed in the assets. It's a sign for us to essentially say, okay, maybe we need to call this out in more detail in our assets. And so everything we do is just about kind of polishing what exists.
And where the questions come from such a wide range of things that, you know, we haven't like been able to synthesize any like overall note. It's more like on an asset per asset basis, based, you know, consistent with what Trevor was saying.
All right. I want to again thank you both so much for you know, answering all these questions, telling us the story, again, showing us how the sausage is made. This was really, really amazing. I really appreciate it.